Mike, once again, like Gantt, you can tell they're friends. They got to be friends. Mike says, let the people know. Grammy winner, Nobel Prize in molecular chemistry. You won that? Academy Award winner. Really? That was you? Oh my God.
I slapped the guy on stage, remember?
Oh.
That was me. That was me.
You look different, Taylor Swift. All righty. We out of all of these, he gave me like 4 pages of stuff. I'm not listening to that. What I am going to tell you, though, this is a really great guy. He's super smart. He thinks he's smooth, daddy smooth. Every now and then, he and Gantt try to have cool-offs, right? But when really, they just nerds in color, and that's all. Look at them. They're a good deal. You ready, Brian?
I'm ready.
You ready to rock this?
I'm ready to rock this.
All right, I'm sorry. You ready to rock this?
I'm ready to rock this.
That's what I'm talking about. Go ahead. I know that's going to hurt you. Look at him. And look, he wore his slightly swole hoodie. Almost. Okay, it's gone now. But, yo, give it up for the incomparable Mr. Michael Liendo.
Thank you. Awesome. Awesome. Let's give it up for Kayla. Let's give it up for Richard. One time. I was told that the best way to kind of anchor this is to make sure that I got engaged with the crowd and that we had a great reaction. So at this point, if you were to look under your seats, you'll find that there's nothing there. But I do want to put an emphasis on making this engaging, okay? My name is Michael Liendo. I work for AWS, and today I'm going to back things up. Just one slide. Two slides. Because we're going to be talking about AWS for front-end developers. And there's a bit of a misconception out there in that it is tailored for just back-end developers. In fact, one of our amazing sponsors today, Cloudinary, is built on top of AWS. And we'll talk about some of the services that they use in today's presentation. Now, if you have your phones, I really, really want to encourage you. This is the talk where you want to pull it out. This is the QR code that you're going to want to scan for this presentation. So I'll give you a moment, and some of you are already engaged, some of you are already checking it out. If there is a portion of this presentation that you feel is just amazing, check it out. We have the amazing Gantt in the emoji crowd. Thank you. I see you all putting up the fire emojis. You're loving it. If you're joining us on Discord, hit up the QR code. It's great. And this is going to be a thorough theme here. We have the amazing LaFrance as one of the emoji items out there. Feel free to go ahead and select him. And then myself, Michael Liendo. I'm also known as Focus Otter online. So a couple of things on the agenda, a couple of housekeeping items. We're going to talk about how AWS is structured. I realize that a lot of us maybe haven't even used AWS. Some of us might not know how global it is, in fact. And then a step further, we're also going to be talking about AWS Amplify. That's the portion of AWS that I work for, and some of the offerings that it has that are really speeding up the development flow when it comes to not just full stack developers, but UI developers, front-end developers, and of course, the back-end developer ecosystem. I got a quick demo that I'm going to go ahead and show off really quick, but really powerful. And I think a lot of you will find it quite compelling in terms of what you can do. And then we'll have a recap with some resources at the end. Yeah, the emojis are throughout the slides. So as you tap on those, those are all your reactions. Which is, in fact, built with Amplify. A little bit about me. Past life, I was a UX researcher. So a lot of user stories, a lot of gathered insight into how customers think, how they use products, where the flaws are, things of that nature. I switched things over and started working at startups, started working at enterprise companies, so big and small. I've been across the field for the past decade, but I think a lot of folks are really surprised at the fact that I'm completely self-taught. I carry no certifications. I've never written a line of SQL in my life. I just pick a few topics and I dive deep into them. And I want to make sure that all of you understand when you're learning HTML and when you're learning CSS, those are career paths in themselves. There are individuals out there that just specialize in accessibility or HTML or CSS, and then you can go as deep or as far spread as you like, depending on what your interests are. Developer advocate now, I was kind of doing it beforehand, so I was the person at the company that was holding the lunch and learns. I was attending meetups. I was putting blog and video content out there before developer advocacy was ever a thing. It just happens to be that now I get paid to do it. And then, yeah, tacos are my thing. I built a small application in my community where we find the local taco trucks because it was just an itch I wanted to scratch. And now it's used by thousands back home. Okay, so this is a map of AWS's regions. So this is the portion where we talk about what AWS is and how it expands throughout the world. So what it comes down to are data centers where all of your information is stored because AWS is a huge company. And then we have availability zones, which are really just hubs of data centers. Now this is actually an older map. We have more being added every year. And in fact, we just launched a couple of regions a couple of weeks ago. So it's constantly expanding, just based off of customer needs. Now, probably the biggest thing about AWS is the sheer amount of services that we have. We have over 200. This is half of that list. And one of the things that I constantly find amazed that folks don't maybe realize is that AWS is different in the sense that each of these services is pretty much its own startup. So when you look at our documentation and when you look at services that are very similar but maybe just slightly different, the reason is because we can move very fast in the sense that each team operates as if it were its own business, just a really well-funded business. But when it comes to front-end development, you don't need to know all that stuff. It's great. But no one actually has used every single service to the degree where they have an application that takes advantage of it. You might have individuals that are well-versed or have a little bit of knowledge and everything, but no one's going to dive deep on all of them. So you pick a few. So when it comes to front-end developers, there honestly are just a few that we can take advantage of, but they're key to many of the applications that we build. I really like this picture here because it reminds me of myself. When I was first starting off with AWS, I was that person building front-end applications, getting used to just mixing colors, having a good design, but then there was that scary kraken known as the back end behind me. Right? Front-end developers don't typically mess with databases. We might interact with an API, and we have a couple of other key components that we typically use, but that kraken is always going to be there. And again, this is coming from the guy who works at AWS, but has never written a line of SQL. So how can we make things better? Well, AWS has this concept of undifferentiated heavy lifting. And there is one piece of information here that you really want to sort of cement in your brain. It is undifferentiated heavy lifting. What that means is your users oftentimes don't care that you spent 2 weeks trying to build this really cool thing when you could have paid a service $19.99 and it would have been done for you. Or AWS has a service that can easily help you out. Your users don't care if you used React or Vue or any of the other Svelte frameworks that are out there. They just want a nice experience. Oftentimes as developers, we tend to forget about that. So let's walk through a simple user journey, something that pretty much every front-end developer worth their salt is going to run into at some point. This is an application that you engage with. You need to have the ability to log in. You need to have an API where you can get data. You also need maybe a database. And that database can be as simple as local storage, where it's stored in your browser, session storage, where if you close a tab, it's just kind of gone, or a full-on database, such as Prisma or DynamoDB, which is an AWS offering. And then also, once you have that application built, you can't be like, great, I'm going to ship it off to the rest of the world and make millions of dollars. All you got to do is check it out on localhost 3000. You need a place to host it. So when we graduate from that simple user journey, you have all these other considerations, and you haven't even gotten the product out yet. How do you have live updates? How do you have the ability to upload images? And then what happens when you have that really cool login form that you spent so much time building, but then your user forgot their password? Did you even consider that? I usually don't. And then now, because we're in the new modern age of front-end development, we have multiple choices. REST versus GraphQL. What happens when I get 10 users versus 10 million users? These are all things that we have to take into consideration. And these are things that AWS solves for us. But this is fine. So in comes this product that I've been chatting about for a couple of times now. Okay? This is AWS Amplify. This has been created to purposely solve this whole idea of front-end developers needing to gain access to AWS services. Because there's been a gap. There's been a gap in documentation from AWS. There's been a gap in how easy it is to get onboarded with some of the products and services. There's a fear of, well, what if I get set up with my AWS account and now I have this scary, huge build because I don't really know what the hell I just built? These are all real-world considerations, and these are problems that we're trying to solve. So a little bit about the Amplify toolchain and what we do have to offer. We have a command line interface. We're actually going to be checking that out today. We also have UI components. So again, if I'm building out an application, I don't want to have to design and style the same old button. I don't want to have to design the same old input field, or even bigger things like login components. I want all of that tailored for me. When it comes to hosting my application and having it scale automatically depending on the amount of users that visit it, you can host your application with us. And then we're not going to get too deep into it today, but we have really cool and newer offerings where you can develop your application in Figma and just design it. And then share that link over with us, and we will generate React components for you based off of that design template. So when we revisit that simple user journey, what does it look like when we take advantage of some of the services that I'm sort of alluding to at the moment? Well, when it comes to login, API, and database, we simply replace those. Amazon has a service called Cognito. Cognito will give you 50,000 users before it ever starts to charge you. And my thing about that is if you have 50,000 users hitting your site and you haven't figured out a way to monetize, like, come see me. There's bigger problems to talk about, right? When it comes to building out your API, we have two flavors. We have API Gateway, which is a REST offering. And then we also have AWS AppSync, which we're going to take advantage of today. This is a managed GraphQL service. It's probably one of my favorite services that I've used. And what it does is let front-end developers focus on interacting with your GraphQL database or your GraphQL service. But you don't have to manage the server itself. It will scale automatically. It will give you auto-generated code. And again, we'll take an example and put that into a real-world scenario in just a moment. And he's not here today, but Nader Dabbit, I'm actually sort of working in his position before he left AWS. We have Amazon DynamoDB. This is what powers Amazon.com whenever you go shopping, whether that could be today or on Black Friday. That's the database that scales to millions of users per second. And it's really cool that you can just sort of instantiate that and then host your application on Amplify, our hosting service. So when you log in to Amplify, you have the ability to set up Cognito not through clicking through the AWS console, not through having to call APIs through the terminal, but we have a dedicated route for front-end developers. We use common speak. So we don't say provision the authentication service so that you can yada, yada, yada. We're just like, hey, I want to add in authentication. Here are the basic things that I want to do. I want to have email. I want my users to have the ability to log in with a username. I want to probably dictate the password length and some of the features in that regard. You could even set things up like token refresh and how long it takes for your application to expire those tokens. And then when it comes to Amazon AppSync, again, one of my favorite services, we wrap that and we provide a service called Data Store on top of it. The beauty of Data Store is that it is offline first. Oftentimes we miss that aspect of accessibility, and this is a prime example of AWS putting their foot forward, because with Data Store, you can have no internet connection and your application will function just the same. We'll simply cache that data, and once you resume connection, we'll upload all of that back up to the cloud. When it comes to the reactions that you're seeing on the screen, this is pretty much what I did today. We have an ID, we have, which is a unique identifier. We have an emoji, which is either a fire emoji, the otter, or one of the other options that you see there. And then we have a name. From there, I went ahead and I deployed the application to the cloud, and a lot of this code got generated for me. That link right there, I believe, is to the repo, where you can see it's really 3 lines of code that do a lot of the magic here. So let's walk into this demo, and we're going to sort of pivot and take a look at some of the UI components along the way in this application that I featured, but I want to put the scenario in front of you. We're tasked with adding a login form for our users to get signed up. We have to set up a database. Typically, our users are going to want a way to upload photos, and we have to do so in a manner where not just anybody can do so, right? I love you all, I just don't trust any of you, right? You can't just upload anonymous photos. And then to join that all together, we'll likely have an API that we can tie into. I have like 15 minutes left to get this set up. Okay. Let's go. All right. Here's our starting point, okay? We have an application here. It says, hello, random person. It doesn't know who I am. And then we're going to choose a file. This is just a input field with a type of file. And then we have a photog. Photog is just the person who took the photo. The description, used for alt text. And then we're going to go ahead and submit that. The idea is that once we have this all taken care of, and I click on submit, there's going to be a nice, beautiful photo that shows up right here, if it works. Demo gods, help me out. So what I'm going to do is hop on over here. We're going to hop into the code. Now, we're going to work in the terminal. This is just all of the code that you saw that formed the UI. And size-wise, I think we could probably go up one more. And I'm going to be using the Amplify CLI. Now, as I mentioned, I want to add in authentication. And we don't say things as a front-end developer, I want to provision Cognito. I would say, hey, Amplify, I want to add auth, like so. And it's like, hey, all you have to do is initialize your project with Amplify. You see I pulled that off like I meant to do that? So to initialize a project and make it sort of Amplify aware, I type in Amplify in it. It's like, cool, give me a name. Awesome. And it's like, well, you have this thing called a package.json. I know a lot of details about your project already. I know that your editor is VS Code, that you are working in JavaScript because you've used NPM. And I can also inspect that this is a React app. So do you want to use these defaults right here? And I can override them by selecting no, or in this case, I'm just going to select yes. Great. From here, we have an AWS profile. I can configure this based off of my local machine. I can pass in access keys. And then if you want to use for the AWS folks in the crowd, if you want to use a different form of signing your user, you can do that also. I already have a user created. And this is my focus autodev alias that I like to go by. And from there, all it's doing is just creating sort of this staple that this launching pad that I can use. couple of roles get created under the hood. It's using a service known as CloudFormation. This is our base for having infrastructure as code, but again, it's really just setting up our application. And just like that, you saw that all of the roles for getting this taken care of went ahead and got complete. And it's like, cool, if anything goes wrong, we would like to know about it. So you can opt in to letting us know about anything that happens there. Now, as I was saying before, let me clear this out. And I can say, hey, Amplify, I want to add in authentication. Now, I can get super fine-grained. As you can imagine, there are a lot of things that you can do with AWS. The nice thing is that you don't have to worry about those because there's really smart people at AWS that have a sense of reasonable defaults that many applications will take advantage of. So I don't want to use a social provider like logging in with Facebook or Google, but I can absolutely get that set up. Instead, I'm going to select the default configuration. It's like, cool, once you do this, just note that you can't really go back, right? That makes sense. I can't say username today and then email tomorrow. Username's good. I don't have any advanced settings, so I'm done. And just like that, locally, I went ahead and got authentication set up. Okay, so there's that piece. Next up, maybe I want to add in the ability to upload photos and have them downloaded and displayed in my application. Well, I will clear this out. I'm going to say Amplify, hey, go ahead and add storage. It's like, cool. Now, as a front-end developer, I just want to make sure that you're aware you can add in storage such as videos, photos, etc. Or do you mean storage like a database? It's like, good call, good looking out. I'm going to go ahead and say content right here. Friendly name, I'm going to stick with the defaults here just to cycle through. And then this is that security in mind. It'll walk me through this pathway of, do you want your images to be available to guest users or authenticated users? Now, I'm going to say authenticated users because I really want to tie this to the mindset of you have to sign up for my application to be able to interact with this. Cool. But, I mean, just because they're authenticated, that doesn't tell me what they can do, right? It's that whole authentication versus authorization mindset. Well, I'm going to say that if you signed in, you have the ability to create and update photos, but you also have the ability to see them. Now, when it comes to deleting them, we're going to hold off on that. And then from here, I don't want to respond to any events. I'm just going to move on to my next step, which is my favorite part. Because when it comes to adding in an API, and when it comes to using GraphQL with AWS, we make it super easy. Following the same nomenclature as before, I'm going to say I want to add an API. And it's like, cool. Do you want to add in a GraphQL API or a REST API? GraphQL is the way to go. And it's like, all right, give me a name. Looks good to me. Go ahead and set the authorization mode, which in this case, it's just a public API key. But again, I have authentication that I just set up locally. So I'm going to tweak this. I'm going to say I want to use that Cognito user pool that I just created. Then do I want to configure any additional? Do I want to layer my authentication methods? I'm good for now. And it's like, cool, let's go ahead and continue. But hey, by the way, do you want to start off with like a template? Something where we can do relations within our NoSQL database? No, I'm good for that. I'm just going to do a blank schema. All right, well, do you want to edit it now? And because it knows that I'm working in VS Code, when I say yes, it's going to automatically open up that file for me. Cool. Let's take a look at what got created. Little stubbed out content from when you're first developing. I'm going to throw in the actual schema that I'm going to deploy. That's it. That's my API. I'm going to call it photo data. It has an ID. Okay. So every new record that gets added is going to have a unique identifier. Because I specified the type as ID, it'll be unique. And Amplify will automatically generate that for me. I don't need to import a library or do anything extra. If you're unsure about what GraphQL is doing here, the exclamation mark means basically it's required. It has to be there. For the photog, again, that's just the name of the person who is taking the photo. So it's a string. Give me Michael Liendo. Description is going to be used for alt text, and then the image key is going to be what is stored in that S3 bucket. Okay. When we add it in that file service, we're just going to add a little identifier in our database, so that way we can always pull it in. Now, there's two interesting things that are going on here. We have this app model directive. Okay. What that says is, well, if this is your API, automatically create the database for me. I just said app model, and it creates all of that. But what about authorization? Well, if I say add auth, I could say, well, allow private, meaning only allow users who are signed in to interact with this. And I can get really granular here. And I could say, well, only allow certain individuals, or only allow the person who created this item to interact with it. But I'll keep it like that for now. I'm going to save. When I check out what I just As I was saying, it's never too early to learn about AWS. Run an Amplify push is going to automatically check to make sure that my is correct, because how many times have we pushed something up and didn't find out until it broke in deployment? Everything passed, and then it's saying, well, it looks good to me. Do you want me to automatically generate all of the code for you to create, read, update, and list items and delete from this database for you? Yeah, I think that sounds pretty good. So I'm going to say yes. In addition, as we were talking about earlier, you can generate TypeScript or JavaScript or Flow, if you still use Flow, automatically for you. JavaScript is good for me. And it will even allow me to specify where all of these files are going to be created within my project. Default looks good. Go ahead and update. And to make sure that I don't do any foot guns, such as having nested values that just sort of cyclically call one another in an endless loop, I can specify a depth. And just like that, it's going to deploy my API. Now, here's the thing. This is going to take, as I've tested today, 4-ish minutes. Okay? And when I stare at my computer screen, I got super frustrated. I was like, oh my goodness, why is it taking so long? And then I'm like, oh yeah, well, if I had to do this by myself, it would take me like probably 2 days, give or take. So it's amazing to me just how fast we're able to do this. If I was asked, hey, Michael, can you deploy an application to AWS, a full stack app? I'd be like, yeah, sure. Like, end of the week, sound good to you? But now, I mean, I'm browsing Reddit. I'm messing with Gantt. We're having a good time. And I'm just walking away while it's doing all the heavy lifting for me. I think that's amazing. So while this is deploying, I'm going to work on my application, multitask. And we take a peek at how this is all being bound together. Now, using the JavaScript libraries that Amplify provides, I'm going to uncomment this. And you can see we just have an AWS Amplify library that we can take advantage of. But it doesn't stop there. I can bring in, such as what Will was talking about in his talk regarding React Context. Amplify has its own version of context, which will give you both styling for your application, in addition to information about the logged in user. So I'm going to keep those and uncomment my configuration, and we'll take a look at what's happening there in that config file once everything gets deployed. So I'm going to save. I'm going to come over to my application that really just has all of my business logic of the UI that we were taking a peek at earlier. And it's really not all that much, right? We have a couple text fields. We have a button. It's a basic form. And then we have a way to iterate over the data that we get back from our API. But the heart of it is just fetching the data in the first place. That's going to come right here. And I'm saying when the application first loads, go ahead and query my database. No connections to set up, no servers to run. I'm simply saying amplify or API.GraphQL and pass it in this list photo data, which is automatically going to be created for me. Aside from that, I'm back in just regular React land. Now, because these files are automatically going to be created, and because I already told it where to create them, I know where to bring them in from. So I'll uncomment this. And we should be good to go. I think we're still deploying. But you can see in the logs here where we're at. We've already deployed our authentication. Our storage category is done. And now it's just working on our API. So let's take a break from there. And I just want to take a moment to emphasize the UI components that got built. This is actually fairly new. We have React components that we purposely built out for front-end developers. You can take advantage of these. They work very similar if you're used to Chakra UI, if you're used to Material UI or system design, where you have this idea of tokens that you can bring into your application. And you can use that to rapidly style and get a look and feel. Everything's customizable. You don't have to be bought into the AWS ecosystem. It's an open source project. In addition, another part I want to touch on is the application that you're using to interact with the slides. If you notice, all you had to do was hit that QR code, and anybody could go to it, right? Maybe not the best thing to do since it's a publicly available site. But at the same time, it doesn't really justify setting up an entire authentication system just for that. Right? Well, this is the Amplify hosting service that we provide. And it's connected to GitHub, so anytime that I push a commit up to GitHub, it will automatically redeploy my application. And I can come over here to the side, come down to access control. And because it's based off of my GitHub branch, I can say, well, yeah, this is currently publicly available, but if I manage the access, I can restrict it. We'll say it is Magnolia. And then the password will be the same, Magnolia. Save that out. And if you have that application still open and you were to go ahead and refresh, can I get some nods? If we have an authenticated system, we're looking good in the back. Perfect. Thanks, James. So that way, this is perfect. When I'm building out applications for my clients back home, this is what I use. I use it to preview. I have a development branch set up for them. I send them the link. I'm like, hey, it's secure. Only you can access it. It's just something that gives them a sense of security while also letting me iterate on what I'm working on. Heading back over to our application. We're done. We're deployed. Now, there's one piece that I haven't touched on just yet. And that is this AWS exports file. Am I good on time, Richard? Perfect. And this is all the stuff that got generated for me. These aren't really secret values. It's just sort of how do I get application type values, configuration in a sense. But it talks about authentication. It talks about how do I get file storage. And it has my API link already in there. Again, all things I would have to keep track of if I was doing this on my own. So let's take a look and see what happens here. Now, I promised that we have a way to get our users signed in. So I'm going to refresh. And it's like, hey, we don't have a current user. That makes sense. We never signed in. We never signed up. How do we fix that part? Well, recall that I was talking about how Amplify doesn't just give you buttons and inputs. We have fully connected components that you can touch base with. And in this index.js file, right at the top, I have this with authenticator. This will wrap any page, any route, any piece of my application, and make sure that the user is fully authenticated. This is the highest level form of doing it. It offers the least amount of customization but in many cases, it's exactly what you need. If you need more customization, we have a different component. And if you want to go off the beaten path and just write up your own style and authenticated system, we provide APIs. So that way you decide what the UI looks like. Let's just swap this real quick. We'll go here, we'll bring that in, and head back to our application. It gave me all of this. I have the ability to sign in. I have a forgot password, bless you. I can go back, I can create my account, and we're going to do just that. MT Liendo, my social security number, and let's create the account. Now here's the cool thing. When I click on create account, recall that I didn't say anything about, hey, can you automatically configure an email provider and send me a code, right? When I said, give me all the default best practices, Amplify did that for me. I have to check my phone because they just sent me a code. Today, we're going to be rocking with 055818. And with any luck, now it says, welcome, MT Liendo. It knows who I am. Let's take it a step further. I'm going to choose this file. I'm going to select a safe for work photo. And that was the Amplify logo. Now, when I click on submit, a couple things are going to be happening. This data is going to be sent off to the cloud up in AWS, touching base on one of those data centers that we saw in the very beginning of the slides. In that time, it's going to come back to me and say, yep, everything was saved. We have both data over in your database, and we have a file that is over in S3. If all of that turned out great, I should get a response. And in that response, I should have a link to the photo. This link is only available to me because I'm a signed-in user. There's submit. Isn't it crazy how fast this stuff happens nowadays? Like, we don't even think about it. It's across the world. There's the Amplify logo. It looks like the day is saved. And when I come over here, we also have Michael Liendo displayed right there. Thank you, demo guys. So, looking back on the slides, oh my goodness, they were just queuing up. That sense of sort of the, I guess that's a testament to React and also the real-time data that was flowing in. It was all being queued up, right? My application never really dismounted. In sense, it just paused. A couple of resources for you. If you want to dive deeper on Amplify and what it can do for you, there's my YouTube channel. Hit that like and subscribe. Amplify docs, they come second. And then if you want to check out the repo, then we also have the repo put up over there for you. I'll give you a moment, but I definitely want to thank you all for your time. Thank you, MagnoliaJS. Thank you for the amazing MCs. And especially thank you all for being here today. Perfect.